How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Eulier Gonzalez. That's right. So, I want to now explore the topic of model as a way to now is finally understand what is the motivation behind this model patterns and how can we use that now in the development of web applications, whether it's on the front end, the back end, you name it, right? And why it is important to understand this, because this is the natural step in evolution of the entire web development ecosystem. So because we started from on the early days of writing applications that only provide some certain animations, right? From the 1994, which is when Brian H. created the language in 7 days, known as Mocha, the internal code name. And then now the marketing team say, hey, well, let's go into now is position this language as a lightweight alternative to Java. Well, so because now through a series of acquisitions, the legal trademark now it is owned by Oracle, right? So Netscape actually was acquired by Netscape was acquired by a company I don't remember right now. I don't know if Sun Microsystem. So it was acquired by Sun Microsystem around about 2001, something like that. And then Oracle, because now Microsoft Systems struggle in 2008 with the bubble crisis and all that kind of stuff. So now, again, the genius of the Oracle owner right now, the CEO of Oracle, and I think the majority of the stakeholder, uh, El, uh, Ellison, Ellison, the Oracle, right? Larry Ellison, okay? So Larry Ellison, all right? So Larry Ellison now it was in a good position to bought all of this asset through a series of acquisition, right? So it acquired now Microsoft in 2009, 2011, something like that, and all of the technology and assets and R&D and goodwill and uh, you name it, right? All of the assets and also the liabilities that this company have. So, AKA now, Oracle owns the legal trademark of JavaScript, and despite the language, no matter how you want to call this, now this legal trademark is not enforced at this point, right? And I mentioned all of this is because we all start writing these small applications to provide this small interactivities. And as the year passed, and as we're starting to see the real benefit of using this kind of developing this kind of application here, which is the ability to now is sell goods and services over the internet, all right? And now the natural evolution is to create now a standard and then a team that oversees this spec known as the TC39 that through a series of stage they actually evaluate if a particular proposal works all the way up to be accepted as part of the spec. Now, these are made by a bunch of folks in the web industry and also browser makers, right? That once that is done, the process, of adding a particular proposal to the spec, well, it takes some time for the browser to implement that. So because of that, we have now things called like polyfills, which is something that allows you as a JavaScript developers to use is these new features, right? By extending the functionality of your application and providing you is this snippet that you can work and you can use them. So because now these environments or these JavaScript engines can run back in the old days only on the browsers. But now, again, as the industry mature and evolve, well, we can now run this on a server and then on the light bulb and then on the robots and holy moly. Uh, so this is why Node come up here, right? Somebody say, hey, this will be a brilliant idea to now bring is the JavaScript language to the server, right? So pretty much like on the browser, you can run now JavaScript engines. So you also have on the server. But despite all of these environments, the only reality that matters is the web. And anything that needs to diverge from the web, there is a specific appendix on the appendix B that describes certain behaviors that needs to be supported through legacy reasons, and that is that certain features that needs to be supported because it is well used by a lot of web applications out there in companies, business, with the use of new syntax also proposed and now accepted as a spec by the TC39. So we have now is the uses trick, which say, hey, JavaScript in itself, we think that because the nature of the language, which is an interpreted language, right? It's an scripted language. That's what the scripted means. Scripted means that it's an interpreted language. This process of analyzing code is slow by its own nature, right? Because it goes through and analyze one line after the another, and if there is a bug, then it's going to now crash your app, right? So because now JavaScript doesn't behave like that in 2025, it is pretty much work like a compiler, not in how it generates the output, but how it analyzes the code. And the observable behavior is when you look now at how it analyzes early errors, syntax error, and hoisting, right? It has this compile phase here. So because the concern around JavaScript is among several developers is that the language is not fast enough. A bunch of Mozilla engineers back in 2011, they created a subset of JavaScript that allows to where they now successfully pour an Unreal game engine into the web. So this subset of language was not intended to be authored by a JavaScript developers or by developers. It just shows that by providing its specific hints to the engines, now JavaScript can run this kind of games. And as the year passes, in 2016, 2013, 14, so now, again, a bunch of Mozilla developers say, hey, you know what? It'll make much more sense if we skip now to the parsing phase. So it pushing now the boundaries here. So by having now an assembly-like language known as the WebAssembly that allow us to now pour is to a target language. So you can now pour a particular application reading on C, C++, Java, Python, Ruby, Rust, into now this WebAssembly code that can now run in any of these WebAssembly environments. So this WebAssembly now becomes this universal portable target, or universal compiler target, which is I'm assuming that is heavily used in applications like Netflix, right? When you actually need to harness the full power, the computational power of your CPU to actually stream down data, okay? So, with that huge introduction, all right, and because as you write your applications, you need to understand is how to work with variables, why working with variables is important, how your programs work, at least in JavaScript, how now programs cooperate or share their data among different files or programs, right? How in what is a value, what a value represents in a program, which is the state of the application, right? And because we have now primitive in JavaScript as well as objects, and then the primitive are, you can now represent the state of your app as a number or as a string or as a symbol, this hidden a piece of data that is not even shown to the developers, okay? Or as a kind of emptiness like null or undefined, okay? And also is the big int. So when you want to express long integers, right, and do some operations with long integers. So with that, and also looking at the objects and then what objects can represent here. So pretty much like a two-column pair, when the first column is the key and the second column is the value. You can also use now collections of objects to represent now the state of the application, right? As an array, you can also have now arrays with objects that describe this, or you can also have now arrays with nested objects, right? And also functions. And I hit the brake here with functions because JavaScript JavaScript now supports a variety of paradigms, aka way of how you can write your programs, whether it's a functional program or first as a procedural program, right? Or a functional program when the only thing that you really care about is, well, the computation. So you provide an input, I want the output. Or when you care about how different pieces of codes or models or system now they interact with each other, right? You use now this object-oriented programming. So when you look now at how functions, what functions are, and that functions now can be held as a value instead of a variable, we also look at briefly is what what are the different type of variables that we can have, right? The identifier of variables, whether it's a var, con, and let, which act as a container of this value, all right? And then how these functions behave, whether it's you define them, or you declare function declaration, or when you assign that to a variable as a function expression. So this, my friend, this, oh my God, I have to pass through this actually to truly understand here, to truly understand what in the French toast am I doing, right? So, and also explore now is, well, how you can play with this kind of variables or this kind of values. So for example, how you now compare values with the same type or with different type, and what happened when the comparison between different types happens, okay? And also is what happened when you trying to compare or when you want to coerce or transform one type to another, and how to do that, right? Whether it is you do that from number to string, from number to boolean, for number to a number, right? Which, just to mention that, to number to objects, all right? In all of this, all right, forms the fundamental of writing and applications. And then as you now naturally progress to writing apps that do small things, right? Whether it's adding some kind of functionality like this, hey, I want to shift between tabs, right? Want to show me the code or this, you know? So after you're starting to implement all of these different small functionalities, okay, the natural step is to now see how you can organize all of these different programs. So we're talking about here now is scalability, and this is a concept that only when you are deep into this, you truly understand what it's all about. Why, for example, the USRR in the US actually now, based on by looking things at different lens, but the end goal is to how you can now produce at scale. It turns out that what show that works is the capitalist. So this ability to now exchange or dictate, right? That somebody else needs to do this for something. So you settle now a transaction, and these transactions now are part of the human nature, right? So again, I know this is when the field of computations combine the linguistic, mathematic, and also the social aspect and the psychology here. So, in any case, so the natural step is to see how can we organize this code. So whether it's by functions or wrapping that into a model, which is something that is fairly new in ES6, right, in 2015, because prior to that you have is the function or immediately invoke function expressions in the common GS in the case of Node, right? But now we have is the ES6 as a way to organize now our code of what are the things that are relevant to that particular file, right? And also is now classes here. So also is looking at the low-level features. For example, is how you can now do repetitive tasks. For example, like iterating a collection of objects, right? And in this case, well, once you understand how to work with variables and looping syntax with for and while, do while, and also recursion, which is something that you're not going to see that heavily on JavaScript, but it's important to understand that at least how that works, all right? And also how to work with variables and how to scope those variables in a particularly, well, scope for a lack of word in that at that moment, all right? Well, it turns out that by looking at this now, low-level feature, these features that are common in the language, for example, how do you iterate through collections? And now we have is the iterator patterns. And this is, and I want also to make a quick break. I'm gonna hit the break here a little bit. These particular patterns that now are embedded into these frameworks are as part of the front end. Yeah, all of these different design patterns that are now embedded in all of these frameworks is now something that we must understand what is doing. There is no need to actually write your own, but if you need to, go for it. But now the industry has shifted more to what cloud service do I use? So what kind of service do I kind of connect with? All right. It is more not about uh, systemic architectural problems, but economical problems. So again, going back here a little bit, which is, so once we know how to work with this small syntax, right, variables, looping iterations, and now why the language provide this particular pattern is because the TC39 group that oversee the spec, it say, hey, it will make our life much more easy if we have this already implemented in the language. All right. So for common tasks, right, like iterating through a collections, so we're going to delegate now that implementation to the browsers or JavaScript engines to figuring out how to do that in the most fastest way possible. Well, we as a JavaScript developers, we only care to call those functions, okay? And work on that and focus on things that are relevant, which is the business model. So we have now this iterator pattern, all right, that describe is how it's going to behave, the iterator and the iterables. So the iterable is described now a contract that those iterable objects, all right, objects that you can now go into that one after another, regardless the shape of the data, okay, they must implement this interface to actually now allow us to iterate through them, right? Quickly, without having us to worry about how to implement our own logic or algorithm. So this layer of abstractions that's now are guaranteed to that are now provide to JavaScript authors from the spec. This is huge, all right. This is powerful and actually covers specific use cases, right? So that's why you have now, for example, in the case of the iterables or arrays or lists, is mapping. Let me now have an algorithm that I don't have to implement by myself to go into all of these particular elements. And the other is with the filter or with the redux as well. Again, this is part of the functional programming. But in any case, so once we know this, right, also we need to understand is the nature of functions and objects and what is the anatomy of this. So you have another function that part of the anatomy is the scope of the closure, and the other is this value. And in the objects, we have now the prototype object change, or the prototype object oriented. Okay. In other words, it's a way of how now you can delegate property access to other objects. All right. Remember, object-oriented programming is focusing about is how you can make two different piece of programs who operate amongst them, right? So, and then there is another topic that this particular book doesn't dive deep, and I think that's very relevant, especially because JavaScript starts as a synchronous language, right? But also because due to the nature of the web, this distributed computing, that you can have now a computing that is serving content from Sao Paulo or from Tokyo or Kuala Lumpur or New York or LA, Miami, you know, or even Buenos Aires or Caracas or CDMX, Ciudad de Mexico. And so depending on where you are now, all of these different computers that are close to your locations can now serve content to you for that. So in that sense, okay, because now we're living in this distributed era, it is important also to understand is that how we deal is, or at least to describe briefly, how we deal back in the old days and now, right now, with this eventual values in series of eventual values. So now we have is, for example, callbacks as a way to now is by the time that that data arrive, this is the set of instructions or callback that I want you to execute, right? So that makes a lot of sense. The problem is that it requires a lot of coordination to actually keep track of when the data is available, and also is receive that data and receive that data in order that and organized in the order, in the proper way, or organized in the way they were triggered, right? So for example, if you are now communicating with different systems, all right, if you are a bank, for example, you say, hey, I want to communicate with this database that has all of the record of the users, and then once I get that data, I want to communicate with another DB that hold all of the transactions, and then I'll query and query the proper data for that. So just to make things simple, right? And also I want to communicate with data on or I want to check is the user, the transactions, and the balance, right? So let's say you hold this data in each specific database because you hold a lot of records. We're talking about 4 or 5 millions of records, or even more, right? 10 millions, 100 million records. If something goes wrong, you definitely don't want that happen, or you need to have some sort of fallback to prevent that, right? Some sort of contingencies. This is also when the military aspect actually kicks in the development here. But let's say you are now querying is these three databases, okay? So you want is to now get the data in the proper order. So you want to get the data of the user, and then on the transaction, and then on the balance, right? So no matter at which order you receive this, you want to have that, right? So this is one of the things that this callback stuff actually make things quite complicated to keep track of, all right? And this is, well, now that instead of us having to keep track of the time of which this data come from, we can use now the func, which is, hey, let me now hold this specific instructions as a variable, all right? And when that variable arrive, then I'm gonna have this data. Let me actually make a quick recap of this with the thumb here in JavaScript, because the point is that with thumbs, okay, we have is the ability to store is a fun. We have the ability to store is a function here, all right, that I want you to execute at some point in the future, right? That's interesting. Let's say thumb, and this function will be now function. This is the functionality that I want you to execute at some point in the future, right? X and G, right? And then I want you to return is the X plus G, right? I want to return this computation here. So now what I'm doing here is just holding this set of instructions, all right? And then when that data is available, okay, I can pass down to that. Let me actually see if I have on the code pen, this stuff here is the thumb. Let me see if I have him work. No. Okay, no, but look at my work. Exactly. In my work. No, but in my work. Can you, please? Thumb. But in my work? No, I don't have that. Interesting. Well, no problem. No problem. Mm-hmm. So the idea with thumb is that you now hold is this piece of information, okay, as a function, right? And then by the time that you get that, you may then update that or using now an asynchronous function, which is if I explore the JavaScript like functional light here, diggy, it is introduction function period. I do think it is on. No, this is functional. I'm looking as for the async. Async, or the hard part, rethinking asynchronicity is this one. When we explore about the thunk, and again, I don't know what they were smoking when they come up with this. All right. But the thing with the thunk is that you define now a function here, all right, with this identifier called add, and then you now is wrap that function here that is going to hold that. Oh my god, okay. This is why it's important to recap this kind of stuff, to understand is why are you doing the thing that you're doing. So the thing here is that we are defining some sort of functionality. In our case, basic stuff like add two numbers and then return that, right? Block G, and then return that. So once you return that, so what you want to do is that when you call this function here, which is called a thumb, all right. So when you now call this will have now some pre-computed values here that are going to have. Holy moly. So thumb is saying, hey, I'm going to have now some pre-computed value. AKA, let me return this and say add of 1 and 2. Right, well, let me put it here, 2 and 3, right? To give me now 5. So now that this thumb here is actually that anytime that I call here, I'm going to have this piece of information here. So now we are detaching is timed from, so we're detaching ourselves from time. So we don't care about when this will happen, okay? We only care that that will happen. This is one of the mystery and the powerful thing of this. So let me actually use now an example here. So this is an async thunk, all right? So anytime that you call that thumb, what will happen? Well, anytime that you call that, you have is that value. If you call that again, you have now that value again. So what happened here is that this identifier called thumb is now holding this predefined value. Okay, this preset. But so far so good. But what if we want to now is hold that value, hold a future value here. Okay, so if we want to hold now some future value, to say, hey, in here I do want is to now return or to hold that, because that is I want is to now is to hold that information, because that's what it's doing here, is to hold that information, okay, Mm-hmm. So hey, this is my async operation here. Async, async. I'm gonna call this what, like add async. You know, add async. All right. And this add async, what it do is just do, uh, okay, holy hell. It's also receive a callback, right? And say this. I want to know is by the time that this functionality, after an X amount of time, let's say this use magic number here. So after 2 second pass, all right, I do want is to now is call the callback that I'm receiving here, all right, with these values as it is, right? So by the time that we now passing that values, so for example here, let me actually call this and say add, what am I gonna do here? What I'm doing here is just to call this function, and when the time that this function calls, okay, so I'm holding is now a reference of this function, and when that is done, I can pass that callback here. Even though right now it is not clear to me, but it's starting to develop is this notion, aka a at async here. I'm gonna call that with some predefined values, right? And then the callback that I need to receive this. You're gonna say callback here, right? And this is the callback here. So when I call now this thumb, that look at this, look at what this is doing here. Look at what this actually is doing. This thumb, it's saying, hey, I'm going to hold now this, I'm going to hold this instruction that is going to call with these predefined values, okay? And by the time that you call me, I'm going to pass now a callback here, aka I'm going to say add, I'm going to say is now add, right? I'm gonna now pass is exactly, you're gonna receive this callback here, and by the time I call that, all right, this is what I want you to do, right? This is what I want you to do, which is receive this X and Y, okay? So I want you to call this callback that I'm passing here, right? Now passes a reference, and here's when you're gonna call that callback here with these two values as it is, right? Okay, things are not clear to me, and there is nothing wrong with that. Because what I'm doing is holding this value, all right? What I'm doing is holding this value here and calling this function, which is predefined values. So anytime that I call this, I'm going to call this with this predefined value, and that's going to trigger this future value that's going to be resolved by passing a callback here with this value that I receive here, okay? But this callback that I'm receiving here, right? This callback that I'm receiving here, what they're going to do when I call this function, all right, is to say this. So hey, now call this function, all right. This is the okay, this is the function that I want to call here exactly, but it must not be here because I'm invoking here. In fact, it must say something like this. I must invoke this function here. This is the callback that I want to invoke, right? So by the time that that time has passed, it's gonna call this with these two specific values here. With these two specific values here. Okay, this is when I get lost. No problem, no problem at all. So function is here. Okay, so what it's doing here is, look at this. I create this add async to say, hey, by the time that this time has passed, I want you to now execute this callback with these values. So when I call this, I preset those values, and then I pass down a callback function. All right, and this callback function is gonna do something. You know, in this callback function is gonna do something. This callback function here can be, let's say, it will multiply, right? So multiply these two numbers, right? So it will multiply. I want you to know is yeah, when you just to multiply this, right? So by the time that this is now executed, okay, in this case it's not going to return anything, okay, but it say, hey, when I call this function, the callback function here, right, I'm going to accept now something called num, and then, or in this case, it will exactly it is sum, because you're gonna get the sum here. All right, you're gonna receive is the sum and console log that sum here. So in other words, it says something like this. It returned me 5. There is nothing wrong with that, but it's because this callback function here is not adding those two numbers. They are calling it. Okay. No, that's fine. That's fine, because again, this is, understand my gap here. At async and thumb. So what I'm doing here is to set the timeout here. Exactly, and this is the callback function with these parameters already calculated. Okay. So this callback here is now this function that I'm receiving, and the input will be already calculated here, right? And then you want to hold now that computation, that preset computations across your program here, because that's what variables are at the end of the day. You can hold this as a container, this piece of information that you can carry over across different parts of your programs, okay? And that data, now we don't need to wait for that to happen. We know that we will have that piece of information at some point. Holy shit, man. I don't know what they're smoking, bro. My fucking God. I don't know what they were smoking, bro. I don't know what they were smoking, but this is when you get, this is when you dive deep into this topic. But you do that genuinely, right? There is no should be, could be, none of it. There is no word. There is no mind. There just is. Holy fuck. Okay. That makes a lot of French toast sense, bro. So why am I mentioning this? Because when I start on the development here, on the web development in React and so on and so forth, there's a lot of concepts I didn't know, and to me it was like, what the French toast? This is a lot. First, this is a lot. I don't know what I'm doing, and I want to know what I'm doing. Okay, because it will lead me to a lot of frustrations, and I don't. And again, nature doesn't struggle, and I don't need to struggle, right? Nature, when there is a when there's a volcano eruption, or a sunny day, or a cloudy day, tornado, or a hurricane, or a maelstrom, it is what it is. Okay, holy moly. Exactly. It's when that value is there, okay? Now we're gonna receive that value already calculated. This is now async thumb, right? Holy French toast. And this is now async patterns, similar to the patterns that I mentioned with the iterator and the, holy hell, this particular pattern is something that I don't think a lot of people actually know how to replicate this pattern. And again, there is nothing wrong with that, right? It's not. But in my case, I do want to know about this, because this will actually now help me to solve my problems, at least in the profession, and this in the real world, and this in the web development, which is, hey, this is a particular pattern that people before you, right? So you're standing here on the giant shoulders. People before you, now, or people in the past now have these particular problems of how they have now held a value, and when that value is there, an eventual value, this is what we want is to now you to do, okay? Holy moly. That makes a lot of fucked up, bro. That is pretty fucked up, bro. That is pretty fucked up, man. And also you can now get more fancy and to say, hey, let me now make a thunk, all right, to take all of the arguments here, and by the time that function is called, you're gonna call that function, all right, with this argument here. So look at this, where I also is now holding this as a closure, this functionality, and this functionality, I want to keep track of this data, right? And then when the function is being called, I want you to now pass and do this. Uh-huh. Exactly. So apply this arguments here. And we're receiving is this callback to do so. And these arguments now are calling, okay, it's an empty string slide.call arguments of one to hold those arguments here. Slide.call. What slice does? Slice. Yeah, what a slice does, bro? Oh, I do think I need to. Yeah. I have 20 minutes, 10 minutes to go to that. Slides here. All right. Forget about the background. A slide is returns a shallow copy. Okay. It returns a shallow copy. All right. By the time that you call this, you just call it. So it returns a shallow copy. Okay. Of the argument. Okay, it's because they say, hey, create now a new array, and shallow copy is create a new shallow copy of this array that is going to have now these arguments. All right. And so this is the star argument. Again, this is inner function that you have here. Arguments that it tells you is the number of arguments that you are receiving in this function. All right. When you call this, and the n. To see only give me is one of the arguments here, or give me all of the arguments, and the n. Convert to an integer, slide extract up to non-excluding n. So for example, you say 1 like this, right? It said, let me create now this. What the arguments have? Arguments. I do think this is a length in JavaScript. Okay. But if you say now the arguments, object or arguments, okay, this is an object, okay. But what is the shape of this? It is an array-like object accessible inside of functions. Okay, so your calling is this, right, with the arguments, and say 1. So if you put this and say slice, slide.call the arguments and 1, and then it's given to you is Okay. So give me is all of the interesting. So give it to me is like saying create now a new array of arguments. All right. Create a new array of arguments when I only want to get is from 1, start from 1. Slice argument dot slice argument dot slice. Interesting. So if I want to do the type of here, which is an object, all right. So you can say is because you're gonna show me all of the arguments. You can say, hey, JSON dot stringify this object, right? So you can see is what are the arguments that you're receiving here. But this is an okay, this is like an object. Okay, you're receiving this as an object. That makes a lot of sense. So the argument is an object, bro. It's an array-like object accessible inside functions. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so if you want to extract all of them, right, and assign that into a new collection, to say, hey, only give me is the arguments. This is an object. Give me is the values here, and spread that here, right? That's right. And spread that here. Arguments is not a function. Arguments values, because I do need to do so like this. This is object dot values of this. And there you get it, right? This is if you want to extract now all of the values from this object. In this case, from the arguments. So he used now some arcade things to do now, some arcane stuff that actually works. But I'm using now is a new syntax to extract these arguments. So what is doing here is to say, hey, I'm going to now get all of these arguments collections, and then now apply that to the function that I receive, and I'm holding it, right? So this thunk pattern, right? This particular thunk pattern, which is something that I'm gonna definitely apply. All right, I will definitely create now an AI to do this, to check if you're able to understand and describe what is going on. I'm sorry, no sorry. I'm looking is for people that actually are devoted, that they have a devotion to understand this. Not to coding and love to coding, is to understand. That's all. That's all. I don't care if you love or not. It's up to you. But if you have the devotion to understand this, that's different. That's different. So now I get it. This holy moly! Oh my god, that was mind-bending stuff. And I will leave that. Take care. We'll see in the next video. I'll be right back. And we're back. All right. A couple days later, but here we are. Well, uh, I I am looking right now at the thunk idea. Is because in the previous section I was exploring about the another aspect in JavaScript, which is the asynchronous nature. Briefly, because again, what is relevant in today's video is to understand now closures and how now closures open up a new way of how can we organize our code. And all of this is because the language support now functions as values. So it unlock now is the functional programming patterns. So whether it's high order functions, aka the ability to pass now some functions as a arguments to another functions, or return a function from another functions, pure functions, currying partial applications, and so on and so forth, right? And also is closures. So, but in any case, here, as I was explaining, is the asynchronous nature in JavaScript, right? So first thing first, we'll look at the callback and how callback is something that is great, because now you have the ability to pass this functionality, and at some point in future, when that value when you get that value, this is what you want to do, right? And the problem is that it's coordination. So when this data comes, and if this data come in the proper order that we call them, right? So because this is now a coordination problem, especially with time. So back in the 60s, there was a concept called thunk, where the idea here is that it allows you to now store this computation as a variable, as an identifier in this container. And when that value, and when you call that functionality, all right, then you're going to provide now is the functions that you want to run when that value is there. So this is why I explore things like this. So for example, in how to create now a thumb. So if we take a look now, a thumb here, but in programming, because this is not exclusively for JavaScript, in programming, thumb in async programming. That's interesting. I don't believe it. Okay. I mean, is thunk in async programming, exactly. You may wonder, why am I mentioning this? Well, because since we are developing applications that now have to serve is other computers, or needs to wait for some data to be completed, part of this distributed nature that in the 60 and the 70 now developers and programmers back then actually have this problem. They say that, hey, now how can we now defer this kind of computation across different other different computers, right? So this is asynchronous programming, right? And so it is no, but it's pulling this data from here. Or the thunk pattern. Let me say here, the thunk pattern, right? That's interesting that you got it. Thunk here. So in computer programming, a thumb is a subroutine, a subprogram, a callable function. It's a function, A function is a callable unit of software logic that has a well-formed interface and behaviors and can be invoked multiple times, aka you define what this thing is gonna do and then you hold it into a variable, all right? So you can now is invoke any time that you want, right? So a thunk is a subroutine used to inject a calculation into another subroutine. Thunks are primarily used to delay a calculation until its result is needed, or to insert operations at the beginning or the end of the subroutine, right? So we look at how can we create these subroutines by inserting data at the beginning of the routine, right? And they have many other applications in compiler code generation and modular programming, right? The term originally as a whimsical irregular form of the verb think, and it refers to the original use of thunk in Algo 60. We're talking about way back in Algo 60 in the 60s, right? When they have the particularly problems back then, right? So developers in there, they say, hey, well, we have this, and that not only that we need to, this is when people like Distra, all of these algorithms that most of us have never heard about it or barely hear about it, where it's there in the 60s when they decide to pull it together to finally is, oh, they actually Algo 60 to C translator. Holy hell, man. When they say, hey, we need to actually find ways to make our programs that look like gibberish, right? Now, thanks with all of these text editors, we have these nice colors to actually help us to read all of these instructions. But now we have this, right? And also, we have to deal with this synchronous programming and wait for some data to be completed. So this is why they call is now this thunk. And that's interesting, right? So a thunk is a subroutine that is used to inject a calculation into another subroutine, or aka, in our case, is this function. So let's go to read about this. The early years of compiler research saw broad experimentation with different evaluation strategies. A key question was how to compile a subroutine call if the arguments can be arbitrary mathematically expressions rather than constant. A mathematical expression, whether it is, hey, I'm gonna provide you an equation. I'm gonna provide you now is a function. And one approach known as call by value calculates all of the arguments before the call and then pass the resulting value to the subroutine. So again, this is interesting because this is something that resembles a lot to what JavaScript is doing right now, that looks like a compile language in how the code is analyzed, not it is output, and is that one approach known in the rival call by name approach, the subroutines receives the unevaluated argument expressions and must evaluate it. A single implementation of call by name might substitute the code of an argument expression for each appearance of the corresponding parameter in the subroutine, but this can produce multiple versions of the subroutine and multiple copies of the expression code. As an improvement, the compiler can generate a helper subroutine called thunk that calculate the value of the arguments, the address, and the environment of these helper subroutines are passed to the original subroutine in place and of the original argument, where it can be called as many times as needed. Peter Ingemar first described thunk in reference to the Algo 60 programming language, which support call by name evaluation. And this is now the application here, saying functional programming. Although the software industry largely standardized on call by value and call by reference evaluation, active study of call by name continue in the functional programming community. This research produced a series of lazy evaluation programming language in which some variant of call by name is a standard evaluation strategy. Compiler for this language, such as a Glasgow Haskell compiler, have relied heavily on thunks, on this piece of information, on this program or this procedure that you can inject calculations, okay, or this subroutine or this program that you can call later on, okay, is a callable function that you can call as many times you want and inject another subroutine or inject another function call, another evaluation. So compiler of this language, such as Glasgow Haskell compiler, have relied heavily on thunks, with the added feature that the thunk save their initial result. With the added feature that thunks save the initial result so they can avoid recalculating it. So it already stored the pre-computed value. This is known as memoization or call by need. So functional programming language has also allowed programmers to explicitly generate thunk. This is done in source code by wrapping an argument expression in an anonymous function that has no parameter of its own. This prevents the expression from being evaluated until a receive function call of the anonymous function, and thereby achieving the same effect as call by name. The adoption of anonymous function into other programming language has made this capability widely available. AKA, an example of this is you say, hey, now that I get this, right, this thing, for example, I want to defer this computation called sum, all right, and instead of doing this, right, instead of doing that computation at that moment, at this line, you say, I want to hold these computations with this name, all right, but as an arrow function here, okay? And then when I call that function, I'm going to hold that. So this is interesting because this particular concept that I know that we are getting into the functional programming, and you may wonder, why is this? Is today's video is not about talking about closures, right? Yes, it is. But I'm hearing just is explaining what the natural step in the evolution, in the industry evolution, especially when writing applications, that initially is by understanding is how you work with variables, let cons were, let var functions and cons, how that works, what is the scope of this function, what are the different scope that we can have in our JavaScript runtimes, and what are the high level thinking of decisions and patterns that arise when we write our code, aka how can we organize our code as a way to avoid certain problems, name collisions, unintended dependencies, and unexpected behaviors, right? By limiting the overexposure of variables. Again, all of this is based on what Kyle Simpson mentioned, right? And now that we understand that and the value of using is these particular principles, and as we now move to what a function is doing, aka the anatomy of the function, functional programming, right? Because functions are values held inside of the language. Now, with closures, and here by exploring is the asynchronous nature, which is another aspect, and here what I'm doing is just a quick recap of this, okay? Which is another aspect of the language in 2025, is that how we now deal with these eventual values. How can we wait for this data that we're going to receive at some point in future, and how can we now work with that? Okay, because it's not going to work as synchronously as we write our code, right? We need to somehow to wait for this. So callback is one of them, okay? Which is, hey, you're gonna pass now a set of instructions when this by the time that you get that data. So when you've called that function, and that function is responsible for handling that eventual value, right? And then you pass now as an argument is all of this set of instructions as a function here. So what happened is that I mentioned before is the coordination problems, especially when you have to implement that functions to deal with those eventual values. So aka it is, hey, how can we now is coordinate that how can we now coordinate that all of these values that I need, this eventual value that I'm firing up, all of them come in the proper order, right? And then I deliver that when and then I respond to all of these eventual values properly. So we're talking about is two kind of problem here: the coordination and the handling here. Again, I know that this might sound a little bit of abstract, or a bit of abstract here. I know, I definitely know. But again, I just want to bring this up to say, hey, we need to understand is what things is, just to briefly understand is the asynchronous nature, at least in its title, that we need callbacks, and we need also a thunk, and what a thunk is, okay? When thunk actually comes up from the functional programming in the 60, when they have this particular problem. So the whole point of this is to don't miss over 60 years of R&D in functional and software development. So we can leverage on that. So this is what a thunk is, right? So is this procedure that you can now, or is this, it's procedure, it's a subroutine, and a subroutine is a callable function, it's a callable unit, it's a function is a callable unit, okay? So when you talk about subroutines, that's also in all of its definitions here. When you talk about subroutines, I don't know why it jumped to this. When you talk about subroutines, okay, or a procedure is a callable unit of software logic, right? In our case, okay, a function, also procedure, method, subroutine, routines, or subprograms is a callable unit of software logic, right? This callable unit, which can be, so for example, hey, I'm gonna fetch some data, so fetch data, right? Here I'm gonna receive some URL, and after an X amount of time, I'm going to now fetch that data with a URL, and I'm going to assign whatever value that I get it into this container, aka response, okay? And because I have to wait for this data, well, How can you do that? Right? And to make a more simple approach is to say, hey, I have now, let's say, is if I have a user, if I creating a user program, and then I want to define its functionality, for example, is update score, right? So update score, right? And then if I have something like here, say the user with the name earlier and the score 0 initially, right? And a procedure now is a callable unit, right, of software logic that have now the behaviors here. They have a well-formed interface and a behaviors. And this well-formed interface is, well, that you can call this and you say, hey, the user here, it is something that is, say, hey, I want to update the score, right? But I want to do is first, I want to increment the score and return this new value, right? So for example, now if I call this piece of logic update score, right? And then I check the user object, as you can see, I have this one. So, and if I need to update that score, and then I check my user, now as you can see, I updated that. But again, this kind of mutation of this particular data is something that is problematic. And functional programming actually recognize that and now develop a new set of techniques based on the problem that is mutation of your program. This is what you need to have some sort of experience and developing applications, right? At least 6 months or a year writing and developing applications. So, because now functional programming wants to make any particular update, doesn't update the state of a program in an unexpected way, okay? AKA, you might have is another piece of logic that also is updating this particularly global data, in our case, user, right? And because all of this, you can also define as another function here. Let's say some new developers, right? Get in here and say, hey, I want to define as a new, so update score, update user score, right? To be now more specific. And it's gonna do the same, right? You have another part of your program that actually is trying to update this score, right? Or somehow you need some other part of your logic, all right? Let's say is update new use. Let's say you have another business logic, so update user scores based on name, right? So you're gonna receive is the name here, right? And you're going to now check if the name that you receive here, right, is the same as the username. Again, all of this is just a potential problem that you might have. All right. Oops, what the hell? Right. So you might have some sort of additional logic here that actually is updating that user. So now you're starting to realize that you have now is different logic or procedures, this callable or this callable unit of software logic that is updating this particularly, that is updating the same state. And what happened is that because there is right now in JavaScript no inner mechanism to detect when a state changed, or at least prior to EX6. This was very problematic. So you have now all of these sort of indirections to do so. But again, I don't want to get lost into the detail here. The thing here is that thumb, what it does is this, is that, hey, I want to now somehow is to pass to a subroutines and inject this subroutine. I want to now inject a subroutine or a callable function into another subroutine, right? So whether it is I now defer some computation initially, or to delay computation until it is needed, or to put it at the end of the subroutine. So this is why I'm looking here at a thunk, right? Because in thunk, what you're saying, hey, I want to now hold is this subroutine or this function or this callable software logic, aka this computation, say sum, all right? And then I want to inject, when I call that function, is this instructions. So you can say, hey, function here, we're going to receive x and y, right? And then I have another functionality here. Let's say add here, I'm adding is this. So I have now a function that what is the only thing that you're gonna do is just to add these two numbers, right? And then you might want, and then you might need to hold this computation, okay? Somehow with some preset values, right? This is useful for configurations, for example, right? So you might say, hey, this is now a thunk, all right, that I'm going to actually wrap into a function, okay? And what I'm gonna do is to receive this another procedure, all right, or this callback here, right? And well, I just want is to now call this with some pre-initial values, right? Let's say 5 and 10, okay? And then I want to return this. So since I'm receiving is now an exact, I'm receiving here a procedure, okay? Exactly, since here now I'm receiving a procedure, so thunk here always will have this predefined computation, right? So no matter which part of the code I call this, I'm gonna have this particular computation, the same, this prefix computation. This is useful because I held this as a predefined value. So far so good. Now, but if I want to now is hold these predefined values and wait for the data to be completed. So in this case, hey, I have now an async computation, in our case async add, right, where I'm going to receive now the x and c, and it's in this functionality that I'm gonna do this asynchronous, or I'm gonna offload in the workload with a set timeout, okay? And after that, I want you to now here receive this callback and call this callback here, right? I want to do this after 2 seconds, all right? And what I want to do is to say, well, I want to call is the callback here, but now with this pre-computed values here, with these arguments already computed, calculated. So in this thunk, in holding this function called computation, all right, where I define now as a function here, and here's what I'm going to receive is the callback. All right, so I'm going to call this async at computation, and let's say I'm just predefining is this, or I'm presetting this value here, 5 to 10, all right, and then I'm gonna pass now the callback here. So all what I'm doing here is that anytime, so I'm holding is a thunk, I'm holding is in a container called thunk, this function description, or this function, that when I call it is when all of this mechanism is going to run, aka so when I call thunk is when now this asynchronous computation will be called, aka I can say, hey, once that is done, when that asynchronous computation is called, I'm going to receive that data here and get that value as it is, which is the sum here, and I'm gonna get is the sum. So after 2 seconds, I get is this 50. So what it's doing here is that we are now have the ability to use these functions and held that as a token. So no matter when we call this function, when I use the word when, no matter when we call these functions, we can now provide is what we're gonna do with that. That is mind-bending here. This is mind-bending stuff, bro. Again, I don't know what they were smoking, but that was a very potent stuff down there, right? I'm assuming that most of them, some of them should has rely on some sort of substance, you know, or perhaps they have so involved into the topic that they now be in that particular state. Again, the idea of describing thunk is just to understand that similar that with scope and holding scope and defining is the variable inside of a scope, and the reason of why we have a scope is to now allow to hold all of these different variables or containers of values, whether it's primitive or objects, that functions is part of them, okay? And then you share that functionality across different nested scope, right? So you can now share that functionality at different part of your application, as long as it's follow the scope rules. So you get now the idea, or I would like to think that you will get now the idea of how the things actually works and why the thing is so brilliant and so potent here. And why now, for example, libraries like Redux, all right, they allow you to now is, in the context of JavaScript, hold these computations, and when that computations now is called, aka when you call now this async computation, all right, now you're going to provide is what you're going to do, this set of instruction here. So this is what a thunk is. This is one of the things that all of this cryptic stuff is because it's describing a true in that domain, right? So I'm not sure if they actually have thing here in thunk. I'm assuming here, yes it is. So for example, thunk, create async thunk like this. So what you're doing here with creating this async thunk is, look at this. You are now holding this as a reference. Okay, you're saying, hey, this async computation, I'm gonna hold this as a variable, all right? And now Redux provides this this function that is gonna internally hold that. So it say, hey, you're gonna provide is what is the name of the thunk, and also is the functionality that you wanna run, right? And then somehow now here is gonna produce some sort of data structures that is gonna be used here. Let me see what is gonna be used. Fetch user by ID. First create a thunk, all right, and then handle actions in your reducers. There you got it. And then you have now the dispatch here, all right. Which this later dispatch the thunk as needed in the app. So you can see here is going to call that function, because the only thing that you're doing here is to now hold this computation. That's what this create async thunk wrap in parentheses is doing. Hold me this computation here, store this computation here, okay? And when I need it, this is going to return now some sort of values, all right? Perhaps some sort of functions that is going to be now passed down to the dispatch to tell them what is the proper data that it needs to be updated, what is the proper state that needs to be updated, right? This is actually some mind-blowing stuff here, and this is why Redux have to create all of this kind of stuff. And as the language evolve, all right, we have now called like Sunstand, for example, where here now Sunstand is now make use of, as you can see here, is actually following is the same particular pattern. Hey, hold me these computations here, all right? And then bind your component, and that's it, right? You say, hey, let me now use a particular hook, or AKA a function, right? That when I call this function, right, I'm going to now hold some sort of data here. Why Sunstand over Redux? Simply and unopinionated. Make hooks the primary means of consuming state. Doesn't wrap your app in context provider and can inform components transiently without causing render. And well, you got the idea. Why Sunstand over context? Recipes, fetching everything, state, selecting multiple state slice, overriding states, async actions, read from state in actions. Not sure if they are able to immer middleware. Okay, that's interesting. Can live without Redux, like reducers and action type. Okay, you can live without Redux, like reducer and action types. It allows you to also do that. Redux DevTool, install the Redux DevTool Chrome to use DevTool middleware with Sunstand, login action, React context, and TypeScript usage, and follow the best practice here. You may wonder how to organize your code for better maintaining, splitting the store into separate slides. Flux inspired practice, calling actions outside of React event handler in pre-React 18 testing and so. I'm not sure if substance can handle is. Don't disregard it because it is cute. It has its quite the claw. A lot of the time was spent in dealing with common pitfalls like the thread zombie child problem, React concurrency, and context locks between mixed render. It may be one state manager in the React space that gets all of this right. And you can try a live demo and so. I'm not sure if substance allow, because that's not its primary goal. This is what React, the Redux toolkit has. But substance, substance for, how do you put it? Substance for handling async values. It's interesting. Substance doesn't care async actions. And there you got it, right? So you just call set when you are ready. Substance doesn't care if your actions are async or not, like this. But as you can see here, this is again creating a function. You're holding this functionality here. Use fish store. Okay, you define the state, and then you define now is the functionality to fetch this. So it doesn't care about if this action is async or not. So it's going to now update the proper data as it is, right? That's something also that's interesting. That's a very interesting thing here. So again, I just mentioned this because when you use now things like Redux and dev tool like that, often it is important to understand what this tool is doing for you, right? And then why we have, for example, things like promise, right? That promise is now it behaves like an event handler, right? So when the eventual value is available, this is what I want you to do, right? This is what I want you to do. So, for example, you can have is this, right? And say this is the data, and then I want to do something with that, right? So in our case is let me now create now a promise here. Say this again. Say future value as a promise. New promise object. Okay, where it receive. So it needs to receive is the response or the resolve and the reject object. Okay, which is indicating is what it's gonna do when that promise is resolved, right? And here I can now simulate some async task using as a set timeout here. Set timeout, and here to say, hey, so after now and 2 seconds. All right, I want to is call is the response here, right? So call is the response, and this response, which is now a function that is provided by the promise, is say hey with 2000 or with some hello world, Hello world. So all of this, what I'm doing is just to hold, look at this, in future value, again, I'm holding is a computation, a future computation, all right? And when I need to call that and just reference that computation via my identifier called future value, and then when the data is available, I can have access to and then do something with that data, right? After 2 seconds, I get now the value. All of this is something that is mind-bending. It is pretty fucked up, right? You may wonder how this promise stuff, how this function actually knows that, how these functions know that this is the data that it needs to run, all right? How these objects actually works behind the scenes, right? And it's interesting because now I also you can talk to Claude to answer that. So is a promise, okay, is a promise a monad? Okay, is a JavaScript promise a monad? You might wonder what the French toast are you talking about, bro? This is almost a monad, but not quite. It falls one of the monad law. To be monad, a type needs to. Promise fail the left identity law. So this breaks because the dot then automatically flatten nested response if f returns promise, and you get the behavior here. It is flattening. And then you got is this. And then you get is this. The automatic flattening is actually a feature that makes promise more convenient to use, and you don't end up with promise.t. But it means that they don't have behaved like a proper monad. Some people call promise a weak monad, or say that they implement a monadic interface. Since they are close enough to practical purpose, the pattern is still very useful for chaining a synchronous operation, even it is not mathematically pure, right? So all of this is just to, and I don't want to get lost into the detail. Definitely don't want to get lost into the details. Just wants to describe that this functional context, or the functional, this functional patterns that we observe in functions and in the functional programming, right? So for example, like closures, and it is closely related to how we handle eventual values, asynchronous programming, right? It is also just an introduction of how relevant and I need as a JavaScript developers in order to be competent of what am I doing when it comes to developing application here. This is one of the beauty of this particularly the field, right? That you can receive constantly updates from other people and now understand what is the problems and see what you can help, for example, your clients right now, right? So that's the TLDR of all of this. So back to what we really care about. As you can see here, this is a very interesting course from Kyle Simpson, actually, to dive deep into what a promise is, or particularly, he mentioned it's rethinking asynchronicity. I will say is understanding is how do we get here in a synchronicity, in an async and await, to understand is the storytelling. And why is that important? Because a lot of the time, this is how our mind is captured. This is how our mind is seduced, through stories. So here is describing as a parallel and async, callback, thongs, and promise, and also the generator and coroutines and the event reactive, okay, or AKA how do we now handle is series of eventual values, right? And then the CSP, which is channel oriented concurrency. CSP is something or channel orientated channel orientated CS channel orientated concurrency, right? You may wonder why this is important, right? Do not communicate by sharing memory. Instead, share memory by communicating. So this model is rooted in the communication sequential process theory proposed by Carl Hoare in 1968. Again, all of these things that we now in programming are starting to understand and to reveal is because people back then in the 60s and in the 70s, they have this kind of problems. This dealing with single eventual values, and then now with a series of eventual values, right? And not only that, is that now with series of concurring eventual values, right? Holy moly. In Go, channels are built-in language features and are central to Iris concurrency model, enabling efficient and safe data exchange between Go routines, which are lightweight threads managed by Go routines. I'm not sure the concept has been adopted in other languages as well. For example, the concurring Ruby library provide a channel implementation inspired by Go and Closure, corridor async, offering similar semantic for asynchronous communication using put and take operations, with convenient aliases like and this one. Similar to C#, system threading channels, a library that supports producer-consumer pattern with thread-safe asynchronous communication, offering advantage over older constructs like blocking collections. Channels are also used for advanced concurrency patterns such as building data pipelines, where data flows through a series of processing stages, or implementing synchronization mechanisms like read and write mutex, using channels to manage access to shared resource. The select method and Go, and then you got here. The question is that is this in is there an alternative in Rust, right? Or how Rust handled that? Yes, Rust offers several alternatives to channel-oriented concurrency, primarily through its rich ecosystem here. Multi-producer, single-consumer communication, which are not inherently designed for multi-consumer scenarios. In the concurrency in Rust programming language. Rust memory safe features are also applied to its concurrent story. Even concurrent Rust programs must be memory safe. Having no data race, no Rust type system is up to the task and give you the powerful data that is just. And then you got it. Safe share mutable state. So okay, in any case, but he mentioned is, for example, now closure. Enclosure. Here. Channel oriented concurrency enclosure is primarily facilitated through the core.async library, which provide a functional approach to managing asynchronous operations. And when you say functional approach, it's a proven mathematical work that this French toe thing is gonna work. All right? To managing asynchronous operation using channel as a communication mechanism between concurring process. And the difference between concurring and parallel is that concurrent is things that happens at some point in future. Well, parallel happen at the same time, right? And why am I doing this? Why am I telling you all of these things, so on and so forth? Because, for example, programs that are heavily used in dealing with this eventual value at some point in future, series of eventual values of some point in future. This is something that governments back in the after the Second World War, the second World War, the second World War, the Second World War, the World War Second. Sorry. Sometimes I mix that things. After the World War Second, okay. Now they experience this booming, the baby booming, right? And now they have to find ways to manage all of this scaling problem that this that this government has, right? And also the same is for military and financial sectors. This is why, for example, now Nubank, all right, here, this is why now Nubank, for example, all right, where they use heavily is, and I really love about this, man. Nubank in Argentina. And I really love about this particular story here in that they have here in the is Nubank actually there? Really? Is Nubank stock? Holy fuck. That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. Okay. Holy moly. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. New holding LT. I definitely didn't expect that. Five-year max. You see how now the technology combined with the markets, right? This is something that is this is one of the things that I love about this particularly field, the software field, is that it's combining all of these different stuff that are part of the human experience. All right, so I didn't know about this. When Nubank was when Nubank launched, it is IPO. Nubank launched its initial public offer in December 9, 2021. Interesting. Nubank is a Brazilian neobank headquartered in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It is the largest fintech bank in Latin America with around 88 million customers. This is what I'm talking about here, you know? Here we are now dealing with large amounts of, so millions amount of records, right? Holy moly. And 6 million between Mexico and Colombia, and revenue of 8 billion. And in its initial public offering in December 21, Nubank was valued at 45 billion. According to the Q3 updates, the company reporting a 783 million net income for the July-September period, up 39% year on year on a currency neutral basis. No, but after inflation, bro, I don't care about it. Currency neutral basis. No, but after inflation. And Nubank was founded in 2013 by Colombian David Velas, a Colombian banker, engineering, and entrepreneur. Why I'm not surprised of this. He's the chief executive officer and co-founder of the Brazilian neobank Nubank. Brazilian Cristina Junqueira is a Brazilian businesswoman who is the co-founder of Nubank. With a background in engineering, she transitioned from managing consulting to supervising a credit card portfolio at a major Brazilian bank. Mm-hmm. An American, Edward Whipple. It's interesting that this mother barely have anything here. The first transaction with Nubank card was made on April 1, 2014. 4 years later, Nubank becomes a unicorn startup with its evaluation of 1 billion. In the company's first 2 years of existing, it raised 600 million Brazil reais. In September 2014, Nubank raised 14.3 million from Sequoia Capital, along with Cassian's Venture and Nicholas Berggruben. Is a US-based billionaire investor and philanthropist. He's a dual German and American citizen. He's a founder and president of Berggruben Holdings, a private investment company. This is what happened. You know, now you're starting to get into the realm of finance here. This is the economic and the finance. To see actually is now how is the software engineer is something that is not live in a bubble. It live in the reality. It lives in products that works. Nubank's launched its first financial product, an international MasterCard credit card without annual fees that can be completely managed through a mobile app. And then in June 2015, Nubank led a Series B round of investment with Tiger Global Management, along with existing backers Sequoia Capital, Cassis Venture, and Key investors. In 2017, Nubank launched its loyalty programs, Nubank Reward. The program points which never expire can be redeemed for a product catalog or discount on service, travel, and entertainment. Again, now you're entering in the realm of the psychology. Here, right? Customer can try the program for free for 30 days, after which they will be charged a fee in order to further use it. In the same year, it also launched its digital account, Nu Conta. Nu Conta. Nubank presenta Nu Conta. But this is in Portuguese. In October 2018, Tencent bought a minority stake of Nubank worth 180 millions, 90 millions in capital increase and 90 millions in shares. In late 2018, it began offering payment through debit. Payment through debit. In 2018, after launching its new credit card design, Nubank was featured in Guinness Book Records for making the world's largest unboxing. In early 2019, the fintech started testing personal loans with a few of its digital account users. In May 2019, the company announced it will begin operations in Mexico through a subsidiary called Nu. This was the first time Nubank offering its service and product outside of Brazil. In 2019, bro. In January 2020, Nubank made its first acquisition with the purchase of Plataformatic, a company that specializes in software engineering and agile methodologies. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. Plataformatic. Mm-hmm. Has closed its operations. Holy moly. Plataformatic. We are a software consultancy specialized in Elixir and Ruby. Interesting. Mm-hmm. And they close operations. Okay. Developer advocate in Dash Bitco. Founder at Elixir Radar in Sao Paulo. Previously co-founder of Source Level and Platformatech, the company behind Elixir Land. Creator of Elixir Land, chief adoption and in Poland. We built Tidewave AI and Livebook Dev. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Plataformatech. Holy moly. Developer advocate in Dash Bitco. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. All right. Interesting. Uh, interesting. Very, very interesting. Dev advocate Dashbit. Um, exactly. Acquired by Nubank. Past co-founder of Plataformatic. Also editor in Elixir Radar, a newsletter in Dashbit. To run Elixir in production via Elixir Dev subscription. We are maintainers of Broadway, Ecto, Elixir, and others. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Elixir. Mm-hmm. Distribute Erlang. This is okay. An Elixir. An Elixir language. Elixir long on the Erlang. Mm-hmm. Elixir is a dynamic, functional programming language designed for building a scalable and maintainable application with simple motor and TD syntax. This is what it. Oh, okay. It runs on the Erlang virtual machines, leveraging its capability for building distributed fault tolerant and highly concurrent systems. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is why companies like Nubank with elixirs versus closure. All right. Both are modern functional programming languages designed for concurrency and scalability, sharing similarities such as dynamic typing, running on a virtual machines, and leveraging mature ecosystem, Erlang for Elixir and Java for Closure. Okay. However, they differ significantly in design philosophy, tooling, and community. Elixir is often praised for its beginner-friendly syntax, which is inspired by Ruby, making it accessible to developers familiar with that language. It benefits from a cohesive ecosystem with strong tooling, including the fast and lightweight mixed build tool and excellent document that support onboarding. The Beam virtual machine share. Okay. The language designs minimize friction when interfacing with the underlying Beam. Okay, the virtual machines. Platform. As both Elixir and Erlang are functional language, reducing the impedance mismatch often experienced in Closure. In contrast, Closure is a modern Lisp implementation that emphasizes functional programming, and immutability. With a syntax that some find challenging to read or skim due to its lack of high-level syntax sign points, while it offers a broad of standard library which specializes high-order function. This can sometimes lead to the code that is difficult to maintain. Closure integration with GFM. Okay. Java Virtual Machine provide access to a vast array of enterprise-grade libraries and tools, and it supports isomorphic web development through ClojureScript, enabling code sharing between client and server. However, this integration also introduces friction as a JavaScript virtual machine object-oriented and mutable nature can conflict with Clojure. Functional paradigm leading to confusing error message rooted in Java exceptions and requiring explicit wrapper for Java function call. Additionally, Clojure startup time is significantly slower than Elixir, making it less practical for command line tools. A key distinction lies in their approach of web development. Elixir has benefited from the popularity of Phoenix, a full-stack framework that provides cohesive, opinionated structure, attracting developers with Rail-like experience and contributing to its momentum. Clojure, where offering multiple options for web development, lack a dominant, unified framework akin to Rails, resulting in a more fragmented landscape where developers must choose or build their own component. This can be a strength for experienced engineers seeking architectural flexibility, but may deter those focused on rapid product delivery. Ultimately, the choice between Elixir and Clojure depends on team background and project goals. Elixir may be preferred for teams with Ruby or Erlang experience, or for application prioritizing scalability, fault tolerance, and rapid web development. That is very okay. That's some okay. Elixir, and Phoenix. But again, this is a functional program. Phoenix, Elixir. It follows the model view controller architectural pattern. Peace of mind from prototype to production. Oh, and it has a syntax like Python or Dev, where you say, hey, life left, you're gonna render this, and I want you to mount to this and handle this info. Phoenix live view.
Hey, it's Chris McCord, and today we're going.
Okay. Everything you need to ship it: real-time authentication, graph and JSON API, Docker ready, metric, scalable presence, and database. The best of front-end and back-end in your HTML. Reusable components, compiler check, built-in format. Company using Phoenix. Cargo Sense, Podium, Livebook, Bright Cove. Okay. This is a framework on top of Elixir for web applications. Interesting. Okay. And the other is Elixir. Programming. And the other is Elixir here. Elixir is a dynamic functional language for building a scalable and maintainable application. AKA, this is like a scripted language. Company like PepsiCo, Spark Weather, and more see more cases. Even the scores, I am not surprised that remote the scores. Ministère de la Transition écologique. Holy moly. Mexico. Heroku. Interesting. And the other is closure. It's a dynamic development, functional programming. Of course, because this is like Java layer. Okay. Exactly. Platform Java, JavaScript, and .NET. It's because it's an enterprise here. Holy moly. Rich Hickey, creator of Closure, leveraging the structure of data when sequencing. The structure of data when sequencing. Closure support function and first class object and a read event print loop and macro system. But it relies heavily on this alternate platforms. Closure on Beam, the Erlang virtual machine. Impact. With continued interest in functional programming, Closure adoption by software developers using the Java platform has continued to increase. That's pretty fucked up. So, software developer using Java platform with the functional programming. So the language has also been recommended by software developers such as Brian Goetz, Eric Evans, James Gosling, and lead designer of behind the Java programming language. You James Gosling. Holy fuck. Gosling joined Sun Microsystems in 1984, where he worked for the next 26 years. At Sun, he invented an early Unix windowing system called News, which became lesser used alternative to the still used X window system. Because Sun did not give it an open source license. He is known as the father of Java programming language. He got the idea for the Java. Okay, interesting. Okay, for the Java programming language. He got the idea for the Java virtual machines while writing a program to port software from Perk by translating Perk code to VAX assembler. Okay. Good. Thesis, algebraic constraint. Holy moly. Some microsystems, Oracle corporations, Google, Liquid Robotics, and Amazon services, and Amazon Web Services. Why am I not surprised, bro? Innovator Award, of course, man. My respect, bro. Okay. Paul Graham and Robert C. Martin in ThoughtWorks. While assessing functional programming language for their technology radar, described Closure as simple, elegant implementation of Lisp on the JavaScript virtual machine. In 2010, a promoted its status to adopt in 2012. In the Java Virtual Machine Ecosystem Report 2018, which was claimed to be the largest survey ever of JavaScript developers that was prepared in collaboration with Snink, a Java magazine, ranked Clojure as the second most used programming language on the Java virtual machine for main applications. Clojure is used in industry by firms such as Apple, Atlassian, Funding Circle, Netflix, Nubank, Puppet, and Walmart, as well as government agencies such as NASA. It also has been used for creative computing, including visual arts, music, games, and poetry. In 2023 edition of Stack Overflow Developer Survey, Clojure was the fourth most admired in the category of programming and scripting language, with 68.51% of the respondents who have worked with it last year saying they would like to continue using it. In their desired category, however, it was marked as such. Okay, in the desired category, however, it was marked as such by only 2.2 of the survey, where the higher scoring JavaScript was desired by 40.50% of the developers participating in the survey. Initial public release of Clojure. Okay, fixing a memory leak, Java API, transducers, reader conditionals. This is why additional streams functions, direct linking, socket server, introduction, integration with specs, command line tool, improve error reporting, Java compatibility, working around Java performance regression and improving error reporting from this. This is the reason why I'm actually hit the brake here with functions and describing now is all of the and describing is the anatomy of the function, at least in JavaScript, with closures, no closure, okay? The value of this, as well as all the other patterns that unlock the functional programming, where computations is required. Okay? That makes a lot of sense. Clojure treats code as data and has a list macro system. Clojure advocates immutability and immutable data structure and encourage programming to be explicit about managing identity. And it encourages programmers to be explicit about managed identity and its state. This focus on programming with immutable values and explicit progression of time construct is intended to facilitate developing more robust, especially concurrent programs that are simple and fast. While its type system is entirely dynamic, recent effort has also sought implementation of dependent type system. So the language was created by Rich Hickey in mid-2000s, originally for the Java platform. The language has since been ported to other platforms such as Common Language Runtime. Hickey's continue to lead development of the language as it is benevolent dictator for life. Similar like Python and so on and so forth. Exactly. Reference candidate, benevolent dictators that oversee that. They're putting a long list of benevolent dictators here. Diggy, Clojure, Sig, Calm, and you get the idea. What about Go? No, it's because Go was developed by Google, right? Go was developed by Google. Yes. Language Go. The Go programmer. Exactly, developed by Google in 2007, in 2007, and officially released in November 2009. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, okay. All right. Okay, good, good. So, so. So yes. So it's a Brazilian businesswoman, all right, who is the co-founder of Nubank, with a background in engineering. She transitioned from management consulting to supervising a credit card portfolio at a major Brazilian bank. She co-founded Nubank, which is now the world's largest neobank with a focus on providing digital financial service through a user-friendly app. Nubank serves over 53 million customers across Latin America and is one of the most largest digital banking platforms. Junqueira has been a strong advocate for gender inclusion in the workplace. As co-founder of Nubank, she has led the company policy of inclusivity programs and fought to increase female representation in both tech and finance. That's great, but again, this is like forcing people to do things that they are not inclined to do. So they are not. It is not in its nature, right? Again, this doesn't mean that there. That doesn't mean that there is nothing. That doesn't mean that it's nothing good or bad, right? Of course, there might be people that are inclined to go there, but those that are genuinely that have the DNA to do so, they will figure it out. Junqueira was born in September 1882 in Ribeira Preto, in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Shortly after her birth, her family moved to Rio de Janeiro, where she was raised as the eldest of four sisters. She attends at Saint Ignatius College. It's a Brazilian private Catholic school located in the neighborhood of Botafogo. Botafogo. Located in the neighborhood of Botafogo in the south zone of city of Rio de Janeiro. It serves students from kindergarten through secondary school and include also night school for young and adults. It's a Jesuit high school in Rio's Botafogo district. Mm-hmm. In 2000, Junqueira moved to Sao Paulo for university, enrolled in the University of Sao Paulo. She earned a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from USP in 2004. Cristina Junqueira began her career in associated consulting at Boston Consulting Group, while pursuing a master in economic and financial modeling at the University of Sao Paulo. Upon returning to Brazil, she joined Unibanco, leading its small and medium-sized business sector. After Unibanco merged with Itaú, she became a portfolio manager, contributing to one of the largest private banking entities in Brazil. She simultaneously a portfolio manager. She simultaneously purchased and obtained her master's degree in economics and financial modeling at USP by 2006. She then moved to the United States to attend Northwest University Kellogg School of Management and earned her MBA in 2008. This is the thing. This is the pattern that I'm seeing here: the engineering, the economic, and the business. So the enterprise, the engineering, and the economy. Early banking career. After completing her MBA, Junqueira returned to Brazil in 2008 and joined Unibanco as head of the small and medium-sized enterprise. The following year, Unibanco merged with Banco Itaú to form Itaú Unibanco, and Junqueira became a portfolio manager in the merged bank credit card department. In 2009, she transferred to Luzacred, a consumer credit venture of Itaú Unibanco and retailer Magazine Luiza, where she served as head of marketing and product from 2009 to 2012. By 2012, Junqueira has rejoined Itaú. The idea for new banking emerging during Junqueira, Ternum, and Itaú Unibanco, and its subsidiaries, where she observed structural limitation within Brazil banking system. At the time, approximately 5 banks control around 80% of the market, and consumers commonly face high fees and interest rate. After 5 years at Itaú, Junqueira proposed initiatives such as the commission fee credit cards and improved customer communications. According to interviews, these suggestions were not adopted by the institution. In 2013, she left her role as a problem manager to pursue an alternative model. Shortly thereafter, she was introduced to David Vélez, a venture capitalist formerly with Sequoia Capital, who has also expressed dissatisfaction with the Brazilian banking landscape. The two share similar view on the need to more accessible and technology-driven financial solutions. They were soon joined by software engineer Edward Whipple, and the trio began raising capital for what will become Nubank. Why they don't put Edward Whipple here? Why they don't have any mention about him? Edward Whipple in Nubank. You know, they don't even, it doesn't have even a photo, bro. It doesn't have even a photo, bro. Co-founder and software engineer at Nubank. Edward, 12 years there. And he works in the Boston Consulting Group. Princeton's University. And he also received his MBA as well. That's interesting. That's a very, very interesting place to go. Where? Okay. Yep. Yep. Junqueira and Vélez decide upon Nubank as the name to represent their venture. In addition to new phonetics sound similar, the word new, it means nude in Portuguese, symbolizing a transparent approach to banking. Nubank. In December 2021, Nubank debuted in New York Stock, and there you got awards and recognition. She is a Brazilian second self-made woman billionaire. She was recognized by Fortune 40 under 40 list and featured in Fintech magazine as one of the Latin America prominent startup founders. In 2021, Junqueira was selected as Bloomberg New Economic Catalyst. As part of the program, she attended the annual New Economy Forum held in Singapore and Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst retreat to the same year. In 2022, Junqueira was named among the first tech top leaders there. They have been together since 2006 and have 3 daughters. Junqueira commented on raising daughters and being a positive role model, saying, "I want my daughters to grow up in a world where they can dream of being whoever they want, and you can dream of what you can see." Interesting. This is the first time I hear about her. Because it is an elite. It is elite, man. It's elite, bro. It's elite, bro. Cristina Junqueira in Sao Paulo. Anyway, And I know there was a lot Botafogo. Botafogo, where is located in Botafogo? Botafogo. Um, Botafogo, Rio de Janeiro. Where is Botafogo? Ah, Botafogo. Okay. No, but no, don't show me the. That's right. Oh, it showed me here. Interesting. Okay. But that's what is Botafogo is. Okay, this is Botafogo. I was there. That was very high topic here. Botafogo. Damn, so lovely, lovely. It is lovely. It is a lovely place, by the way. Anyway, yes. So Botafogo, exactly. Botafogo. Anyway, and when you look at careers and stuff like that, they're actively seeking is for well, developers that knows that particularly, right? So lead software engineer or senior software engineer, right? So somebody that now is responsible for reading mostly enclosure, this functional programming that is use Java, using Figanel, a leveraging upon functional programming technique and hexagon architecture. Exactly. So what is the Figanel? To obtain or achieve by cleverness of the sieve or the sieve Figanel. Okay, but all of this is in Java, bro. A fault-tolerant protocol agnostic RCP system, remote procedural call. And the using is Finagle. Interesting. This project is used in production at Twitter and many organizations, and it is being actively developed and maintained. Releases are done approximately month schedule, while serve is not followed. The changelog are detailed and include sections of public API and break chaining runtime behaviors. But I think this is Finagle is an extensible RCP system for the Java virtual machine used to construct high concurrent server. Finagle implement uniform client and server API for several protocols. It is designed for high performance and concurrency. Most Finagle code is protocol agnostic, simplifying the implementation of new protocols. And then you have other ones. You have Foursquare, GBank, Pinterest, SoundCloud, blah blah blah. But again, this is a Java virtual machine. It's an extensible RCP system. This RCP system is a remote procedural call. I'm assuming it's this. Exactly, remote procedural call mechanism to allow software to execute a remote procedure. For the Java virtual machine. For Java virtual machines. Okay. Used to construct high concurrency servers. Finagle implements uniform server API for several protocols. Interesting. What was the last update? 2 months ago. Finagle by Twitter, bro. I think this is the first time I open up Twitter here. Yeah. Yeah, this is the first time I open up Twitter here. A fault tolerant. But this is reading in Scala. In Scala. All right. Oh, I get it. Okay, it is reading in Scala, but this is an extensible RCP system for the Java virtual machine. Airframe, HTTP, FinTron, FinTop, WebSocket implementation for Finagles, and all of this. Okay. Is this getting too deep into this? High throughput jobs and inter-service communication using Kafka. Continuous integration and developing into AWS. Storing data in Datomic and DynamoDB. Monitoring and observability with Prometheus. And running as much as possible in Kubernetes. Exactly. This is what a software or a senior software engineer is looking for, or they are looking for, by the way. This is the things that are in demand. Kubernetes, that you're able to monitoring this with Prometheus, also with Amazon DynamoDB. So it is important for you to know the AWS as well as Kafka, right? Not the German Jewish. Oh, German Jewish writer and novelist. But isn't this the Apache Kafka? Distribute events here. More than 80% of all Fortune 100 companies trust and use Kafka. Apache Kafka is an open source distributed event streaming platform used by thousands of companies for high performance data pipelines, streaming analytics, and data integration and mission critical applications. Manufacturing, banks, insurance, and telecom. This is the main industry that software engineers actually is in this domain. Okay. But again, yes. And Atomic. You will be responsible for work with large-scale distributed systems, understand their broad architectures, plan and execute on entire features, collaborating with peers while planning the work ahead, collaborate in building microservices, and work with continuous delivery and infrastructure as code, work with agile software development methodologies, write test instruments, document and maintain code, pair and participate in code reviews to grow and continue the growth of others in and around the team, collaborate closely with product designs and partner engineering teams, participate in on-call rotation for your team, and respond to incidents as necessary. And as you got work focus on backend application. Exactly. Work focus on backend applications and be open to contribute to mobile and front-end development according to business needs. So we're looking at a person who has 6 years, ability to quickly understand technical and business requirements, a problem solver who is able to communicate effectively across functional teams, a software engineer who cares deeply about user experience, proving understanding of our data. You got have practical knowledge and agile development methodologies and previous experience with CI/CD, advanced English skills. So yeah, this is what it is. Hybrid 2-3 times week, or hybrid model, or hybrid work model brings off the office at least twice a week. on strategic days designed to maximize team connection and collaboration. Mm-hmm. Building our future together, evolving how we work at Nube. On November, okay, a month ago, by the way, will be transitioned to hybrid work model. Require most new bankers to be back in person teamwork, starting with second day per week, and then 3 days per week in January 2027. Within 2 days per week, and then 3 days per week in January 2027. An intentional structure hybrid model that balances deep collaboration work with focused individual time. Why the change? A focus on impact innovation. Is because a lot of those bankers, they say, no. If they try to control people, then there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. Okay, but is this? But is this? All right. All right. Good. Good. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. Um. Yep. Okay. Yeah. That's the whole overview of thunks. So be able to describe thunk, what a thunk is, and understand now why, for example, other programming languages are now heavily focused on what is the applicability of this in the industry, particularly on banking, manufacturing, and other worlds, but particularly in banking, which is something that I have experience with. So I do get it now. I completely get it. I completely get it, bro. I completely get it. So that'll be all for this video, and I'll be right back.